SFB Addict here. Let's take a quick look at the differences between various distributions of Linux. Well, at the simplest level, you've got your hardware, the kernel, and the software. So when it comes to the various Linux kernels, there's some slight variation for hardware, but you don't actually have to use the Linux kernel. You could use the herd kernel, or you could use a BSD kernel, and there's other kernels out there. For instance, Windows itself uses the Windows NT kernel, and there's other computers out there like the OS2 kernel and the Amiga kernel and about 25 others or more. Okay, so let's take a little closer look at what we mean by kernel and software. Well, of course, hardware is more than just a simple description. It's your CPU, your RAM, memory, devices, etc. And the kernel handles multiple things. It processes the management of memory and the devices, and your user space has got various libraries and applications that run. So if we actually look at this, you've got a user space and a kernel space, which is what we collectively call GNU Linux or GNU Linux. So the hardware itself, you've got architecture-dependent kernel code for 32-bit and 64-bit x86 systems and even non-x86 systems. And you've got system call interface, and then you got your GNU C libraries, and you got your user applications. Okay, so let's look into that even further. Well, your system calls is running a bunch of daemons. Everything from init to systemd to logins, audio, networking, dbus, package kit, etc. Lots of stuff here. Most of which most people won't understand. And then you've got your GNU libraries. Various APIs that handle open, read, write, memory allocation, printing, etc. And again, probably a bunch of stuff that most people aren't going to understand. And then you got your user applications. Okay, it's the user applications that start to change and get more detailed from this point in. So under user applications, you've got your system software, your desktop environment, Windows managers, compilers, utilities, and various processes. But we are most familiar with calling them things called desktop environments, GNOME, KDE, XFCE, which are your basic Windows managers running on the X Windows system. And for user applications, we think of them as games, internet, email, chat, office software, graphic software, video software, etc. Okay, so how does this change? Well, what we're thinking of as a distribution is this stuff here at the top. The GNU libraries are pretty much unchanged, and your Linux kernel is pretty much unchanged from one distribution to the next. Now, where the distributions will vary is in things like whether or not the repositories that this software is being pulled from is a stable repository, a testing repository, or unstable repository. The software that requests that software from those repositories will be different from distribution to distribution. Some of them, it'll use something called apt, another distribution will use something called yum, and another distribution will use something called RDM. Sorry, not RDM, I meant to say RPM. And some distributions will have their own graphical software for pulling software from the repositories. Some of them will just simply use Synaptic, and others will have their own customized graphic user interface for software management. But basically what differs from distribution to distribution is the unique customized list of applications. Some distributions will stick strictly to the FOSS principle, free open source software. Others will include proprietary software. Some will swear off Flash, where others will have Flash pre-installed. But everything that we think of as the distribution is very customizable. You may start out with Unity on Ubuntu, but you can change that. You can install XFCE and uninstall Unity. If you don't have Flash, you can install Flash. If you are not currently using a proprietary driver, you can install proprietary drivers. So when it comes to choosing a distribution, don't fret so much over really the distribution in terms of what you're going to get. Think more in terms of your hardware. If you have older hardware that came out in the Windows 95 era, you're not going to want to run the same desktop environment as a piece of hardware that came out when Windows 8 was the popular Windows operating system. Older software, you'll want to run a light desktop environment like XFCE or LXDE or something like Damn Small Linux or Puppy Linux. For machines that came out in the era when Windows ME and XP were the thing, you'll be able to run slightly more resource-intensive desktop environments like KDE or maybe Mate. And for the more modern computers, you can run things like Unity and Cinnamon, which require a lot more system resources. But what is not going to change from distribution to distribution is really the software that's available, because it's all available to all distributions. Now, getting a particular piece of software may require you changing something, like changing what repository you are pulling from, for instance, going from stable to testing, or it may require that you use something like a PPA to pull updated software directly, or maybe even going to a particular website, downloading and compiling from source. Just think of distributions as customization done ahead of time for you, according to particular tastes or philosophies. If you are one of the fanatical fundamentalist Linux users who don't call Linux Linux but instead GNU Linux, you might want to stick with the herd kernel and strict pure FOSS software. Or you may be a complete noob and you don't want to have to worry about installing drivers and proprietary software, and you might want to stick with Linux Mint. Or you may be running really old hardware that doesn't have a hard drive and you might want to run something like Puppy. So think in terms of what are your needs, what hardware you have, your skill level, and then approach choosing a distribution from that viewpoint. And maybe then the multitude of distributions for Linux that are out there, or GNU Linux that are out there, won't seem so scary. Anyway, that's it for now. Have fun computing.